Alcohol and Good Decisions by Orphaned Account on AO3. Episode 2, Chapter 2, To the Park. After calming Izuku down enough to put away his notebooks and things from his sleepover at M's, Shouta went to get dressed properly and put a bag of snacks and water bottles together. Not a diaper bag. He's not 2. This unfortunately gave Hisashi, Shouta had been informed, enough time to catch up with because apparently the two fucking knew each other? And if one of them wasn't enough of a headache, then two of them was a fucking migraine. Kyoto was saved from the two belting out into a singing contest by the toddling noises of Izuku's scampering feet. The small child entered the living room with his hair in a disarray, and about a half-dozen toys in his arms. Swiftly kicking M's feet away from him as he went, Shouta stood from the couch and crouched down to heft his kid up onto his hip, blatantly ignoring Yamada's odd staring. "Kiddo, you can't take all of these with us," Shouta told Izuku, earning a pout from the child. "One toy, Izuku. You could play with the others later." Because Shouta didn't want to have to keep track of all of Izuku's favorite toys, because he was surely to lose one, and he really didn't want to deal with a meltdown today. When Izuku opened his mouth to object, Shouta tapped the boy's nose with his finger and repeated, "One, Izuku." Pouting, but no longer objecting, Izuku ran back to his room, toys in hand. Shouta heard the telltale thudding of the boy's toy chest opening and shutting, and he fought hard not to smile to himself. Izuku was a good kid. Shouta really looked out. His tantrums were few and far between, even if his crying meltdowns were a bit more common. And the kid cleaned up after himself. From what Shouta had heard of other children, that was a miracle in itself. Em and Yamada were ramping up once more, and Shouta fought the urge to flare his quirk at the two and yell at them to shut up. He was saved by Izuku once more, however, when the little boy rushed back into the room with a single toy in hand. Abruptly, Shota's good mood dropped, because Izuku had, of course, chosen his present mic action figure. Fighting down the sigh that was building up behind his chest, and the headache that was beginning at the base of his skull, Shota rubbed the bridge of his nose and said, "Okay, kiddo, say bye to M." Whereas Izuku would typically pout at M's departure, the child merely hugged his aunt and chirped, "Bye-bye, Auntie Joke." Shota absolutely took pleasure in the slight disappointment in M's eyes when she didn't have to hug Izuku back. And then the child was bouncing over to Yamada and grabbing the man's hand, tugging and tugging until Yamada stood from the couch and stumbled after the child. Izuku brought Yamada over to stand right next to Shota, even as he thrusted the toy at the blond man. Look, Mr. President Mike Yamada-san. It's you!" "It is." Yamada had an utter audacity to grin dopily and beam down at Shota's child, making the underground hero's stomach flutter. He quickly tempered down on those absolutely not emotions, choosing to definitely not deal with them later. "Wow, little listener, this one is a really old one. Back from when I was first starting out? How did you get a hold of it?" As Shota led Yamada and Izuku out the front door, not so subtly kicking M's shin as she exited past him, giggling up a storm, he listened to his kid retell Yamada with the tales of his 4th birthday. It had been a rough one, certainly. What with Izuku being disappointed about his quirk not coming in, so Shota may have gone a little overboard on the presents, but it wasn't a big deal. Izuku could do with a tiny bit of spoiling every once in a while, especially with how often Shota was out working. And the man certainly felt guilty about that. Being an underground hero and a teacher took a lot out of his days. At night, he would patrol while Izuku's regular babysitter, a sweet young woman who was working on her teaching degree and was a very vocal advocate for quirkless rights, watched him until late into the evening. Around 1 or 2 a.m., Shota would appear at home to pay Hanako, make sure she got out to her car, and checked in on Izuku. He would then promptly fall into bed and get a few mediocre hours of sleep before waking up to get Izuku ready for the day. Izuku went to school further away than usual, which meant they had to take the subway to get there. But Shota wouldn't trade the boy's genuinely wonderful and accepting teacher for any other. Aldera Elementary School had been absolutely horrid, and it had taken 1 week before Shota was withdrawing Izuku from their curriculum and shutting down any and all ties with the Bakugo family that they previously had. The Bakugos may have been friends with Inko, but Shota wouldn't stand for their kid bullying and assaulting Izuku, especially for something as ridiculous as not having a quirk. Which, now that he thought about it, as he hailed a cab, Shota was concerned about that for their day. Because Yamada seemed like the chatty type, and Izuku was too when he was comfortable. Shota wasn't sure whether he was happy or angry that Izuku seemed to already be comfortable with Yamada, but given that the man was present Mike, he'd let it slide. But now that Yamada knew Izuku's age, the topic of quirks was more likely to come up, especially when Izuku was already so fond of quirk theory, even though he could only talk about it in the most basic of terms. What would Yamada's reaction be when he heard Izuku was quirkless? Shota wasn't a wishful kind of man, choosing instead to rely on cold, hard facts. But as he looked over at Yamada, opening the door to the cab for Izuku, helping the child shuffle inside, Izuku beaming up at Yamada like the man hung the sun in the sky. Well, Shota couldn't help but hope. Getting to the park was easy. The cab driver was polite, quiet, the whole way there, which Shota appreciated, given that Yamada and Izuku were talking a million miles an hour about JSL? Yamada was teaching Izuku a few signs in JSL, and even with the clumsy hands of a small child, Izuku was taking to it like a duck to water. It gave Shota pause for a moment. Maybe teaching the kid JSL would have been better in the earlier days. Maybe it would have caused less stifle on Izuku's quiet days, and the days when he could hardly nod yes or no, much less speak. But it wouldn't do so well dwelling on the past. There was nothing to be done for it, and they'd figure out eventually. Shota had figured out quickly how to read Izuku's moods. He could tell when the kid was too anxious to speak, too upset to convey his emotions properly, and even happier than a lard. The whole happier than a lard would apply now. While the kid was talking to present fucking Mike. Jesus, Shota thought, running a hand down his face as he tipped their cab driver rather genuinely. Thanks, he said dryly. The cabbie tipping his hat back and grinning like a loon before driving away. Turning around, Shota took in the sight of Yamada crouching next to his son, beaming at the child just as Izuku had been beaming at him before. Yamada had tugged a dandelion from the ground and was explaining how to make a wish on it to Izuku, the child's eyes wide with wonder. Shota had to tamper down on a smile. It wasn't cute. It wasn't. Yamada was an unknown factor, unknown territory that could be terrible influence on Izuku. But while he stood there watching Yamada teach his son how to wish on a dandelion, Shota couldn't help but think that the man meant no harm. Not to Shota's kid. And maybe not even to Shota. And then Yamada's gaze turned to Shota, and he fucking winked. And Shota felt a blush rise to his cheek. Curse his pale complexion, as he quickly turned towards the park, reaching a hand out for Izuku to take, the child taking it without complaint, having long since learned to do so. Shota began a slow walk towards the park. Shota had learned early on that Izuku was prone to distractions, and, especially with being small for his age, had trouble keeping up with Shota if Shota used his usual long-legged stride. And so Shota walked slowly. Yamada stood on Izuku's other side, still talking to the child about wishes and weeds. "What did you wish for, buddy?" Yamada asked him. Shouta tensed up, not knowing what to expect from his child. But then, oh so innocently, Izuku said, I wished for ice cream after the park. Slyly glancing up at his father, Izuku said in the sweetest of voices, Daddy, please? Fighting the urge to roll his eyes, Shouta said, Maybe, Izuku. They reached the edge of the playground, and Shouta nodded out towards the swinging set. Swing now or later, kiddo? Thinking it over for a moment, a little hand on his little chin, Izuku murmured, Later. I want to go play Heroes now. Then go play Heroes. Shouta told his kid, nudging Izuku towards the grassy area next to the playground. Yamada-san can come play too? Izuku asked the hero, who beamed down at Izuku. They'd fortunately established in the cab ride over that Izuku didn't have to refer to Yamada as Mr. Present Mike Yamada-sen, even as adorable as it was. If it's okay with your dad, then sure. Daddy? Izuku turned, wide-eyed towards his father, and showed up at the inside of his cheek. Oddly enough, the protective instincts inside of him lay dormant when Izuku was around Yamada. Maybe it was because he knew the other man was also a pro-hero. But then again, Shouta knew some pretty shitty pro-heroes. Sure, Izuku. Shouta shrugged. Go have fun. Izuku cheered before dragging Yamada off towards the playground, rambling on and on about how Izuku was going to play as All Might and Yamada could be a villain. It was honestly adorable, even if Shouta sat still on a nearby bench with his arms crossed. He was not pouting, though. Absolutely not. Izuku could play heroes with someone else if he wanted to. Shouta wasn't jealous. It was a little concerning, though, how quickly Izuku took to Yamada. Yamada, of course, had done nothing wrong, Shouta was begrudgingly to admit, and had been nothing but polite and kind the entire while. Really, Shouta had been the one to tug the assholery out of the man that morning. And Shouta very well probably would have reacted the same way as Yamada if their roles had been reversed. So no, it wasn't anything Yamada had done that was concerning Shouta. It was Izuku. What with how skittish and shy he was around other kids, he was confident and inquisitive about adults. Rather, pro-heroes. The boy was a different person around the few pros that Shouta had the misfortune of introducing him to. Gainorka, Best Genus, Mrs. Joke, of course. Endeavor, which had ended in tears. An absolute shithole. For being an underground hero, Eraserhead had worked alongside quite a few spotlight heroes. It would make sense that Izuku was more comfortable with heroes. And Dev Hor, notwithstanding, seeing as now he'd been around Shouta for the entirety of his formative years, and Shouta had, of course, been nothing but kind to the boy, even in his own standoffish way. When Izuku had come under Shota's guardianship after Inko, well, Shouta had been forced to do the opposite of what was suggested. He put on the kitty gloves in order to raise Izuku. Izuku had been an emotional mess when Shouta got him. Even for a 2-year-old, he cried constantly, flinched at any motion from Shouta, and was an absolute recluse at nursery school. It had taken literal years and a lot of hard work to get Izuku to where he is now. And even then, the boy still flinched around kids his age. Shouta only had Aldera Elementary to thank for that. He'd been trying to build a case against him, a lawsuit, but nobody wanted to work towards helping a little quirkless kid. Only M and Izuku's babysitter seemed as mad about this as Shouta, although the two were also the next closest thing Izuku had to a family besides Shota's mother's. In the field across from the playground, Izuku pretended to punch Yamada's shin, and the man did a rather dramatic stagering to fall to the ground, reaching out a hand as if begging Izuku for mercy. Izuku seemed to think it over for a minute before nodding empathetically, reaching a hand out to Yamada, who took it with a wide grin, hefting himself up off the grass and ruffling Izuku's hair. True to form, Izuku leaned into the contact with a loud giggle. Shouta didn't bother hiding his small smile, knowing the two were too far away to see it. So he was a little soft for his kid. So what? The air around Shouta shifted, and a presence sat to his right, at the far end of the bench. An elderly woman sighed gently as she sat, bringing a baggie of what appeared to be birdseed from her pocket. She turned and scattered the seed behind the bench, and Shouta suspiciously slid a bit further to the left, his smile fading in the presence of a stranger. Satisfied with her work, the woman turned back, around, and tapped her walking cane against the wood, smiling as she stared over at the field with glass-colored eyes. Her gaze turned towards Shouta, then out to where his line of sight was, at Izuku and Yamada. "Are those two yours?" she asked him, her voice withering and gentle. "The boy's hair looks much like yours, I dare say." Izuku wasn't biologically Shota's. The man really didn't want to get in on that sort of conversation with a stranger. Instead, he grunted out, "The boy's mine. The man, not so much." It was at that very moment that Yamada leaned down to heft Izuku up, rising the child above his head in an only slightly impressive display of strength that had Shouta near blushing. Yamada whirled Izuku around, seemingly singing something to the child as Izuku's whole body was racking with giggles. Eventually, the giggles was shaking Izuku too much, to where Yamada had to set him down on the grass. Immediately, the boy flopped backwards onto his back, panting for air. Yamada laid down about a yard away from him, pointing up at the sky and making the SL sign for bunny. "Well," the old woman said with a low chuckle, "I dare say he gets along quite fine with your child. Perhaps making him yours would be best, before someone else snatches him up, young man." Before Shouta could stop blushing and blue screen, the woman stood and left. Cocking an eyebrow at the odd interaction, Shouta watched her walk away until she got to the edge of the park, getting on a bus and riding away. "Odd," he murmured to himself. But then two tiny hands were suddenly on his knees, and Shota's attention was turned on his son's wide-eyed glaze. "Daddy, swings now." Shouta frowned slightly and replied, "Swings now?" And Izuku rolled his eyes. Shouta knew the action came from himself, a learned behavior, but he was choosing to blame Emmy. "Swings now, please." "Yes, Izuku, we could go on the swings." Shouta had thought that pushing Izuku on the swings in the presence of Yamada would be an awkward affair. However, it was anything but. Yamada took the empty swing next to Izuku, likely kicking himself forward and back as he continued to engage Izuku in conversation. Yamada even put forth the effort to try and engage Shouta as well, and Shota's one-word and grunted answers did nothing to deter the man in his questioning. Odd. The only person near his age to have ever treated Shouta like anything other than a chore or a bother was Emmy. The man had to admit he was a lot, of a recluse and a loner, when he didn't have about 4.5 whiskeys in him. Antisocial would be touching the tip of the iceberg to describe Shouta. And yet, Yamada tried. And more than tried, he seemed happy to try. With a carefree grin and a laugh, Yamada spoke to Shouta, and spoke to Shota's kid like he'd known them for years, not hours. He talked everything and anything under the sun with Izuku, listening to the kid shout random facts. "Mr. Yamada, did you know that butterflies come from cocoons? They sleep for a long time and then they pop out all pretty." And middle school level quirk assessments. It was all so domestic, which should have been much weirder than it actually was. Shouta found himself comfortable in Yamada's presence. Yeah, quite odd indeed. Aizawa was definitely the stoic, brooding type. It wasn't the type that Hisashi typically went for. He had a short stint of dating Fukukado, Actually, before the two realized they were better off as friends. But that was Hisashi's type. Bubbly, friendly, extroverted. Aizawa seemed to be exactly opposite of everything Hisashi had always qualified as his type. And maybe he could branch out a bit. And then, watching Aizawa's small, gentle smile as he pushed his son on the swing set, Hisashi's heart wrangled and he thought, oh, yeah, he could definitely stand to branch out a bit. But would Aizawa be okay with casual dating? He'd been okay with a one night stand, it seemed, but something told Hisashi that it was uncharacteristic of the man. Maybe it was the fact that Aizawa seemed so attached to Emi, even as he shooted the woman out of their apartment. Maybe it was the way he snuggled up to Hisashi all morning, even as he treated him with distaste, at the least, once Izuku had arrived home. Maybe Hisashi was just a masochist, indulging himself into thinking that he could make something work with a single dad who seemed to hate his guts. Because Aizawa had yet to do anything but glare at Hisashi while all of his tenderness was focused on Izuku. Right up until that moment. That moment that Hisashi had caught Aizawa staring at him and Izuku, crouched on the ground with a dandelion between them. Hisashi had seen the weed and gotten the idea, eagerly introducing Izuku, like the child was one of his students, and Izuku was a brilliant child. The way he spoke about all the random tidbits of knowledge he had and the way he'd immediately taken to Hisashi's mini JSL lessons had spoken volumes. Izuku was a brilliant, bright child. And from the way Aizawa had gazed upon them, crouching by the weeds, Hisashi thought that maybe that brilliant brightness had been cultivated by the most jaded man he'd met since he looked in the mirror the night before. Maybe Aizawa had brightness in himself too. When Izuku started talking quirk assessments, Hisashi couldn't help but grin and theorize back. Of course, Izuku chose to break down his father's quirk. It's probably being the one he knew best, because Izuku was only 5. He wouldn't have a grasp on his own quirk for another few years, or months, perhaps with how bright this child was. An erasure seemed like a fucking rad quirk, one that could conquer Hisashi's misuse of voice perfectly. Shut up, brain, we're not gonna serenade a guy for his fucking quirk, damn it. That's so fucked up. And what with all the talk on quirk theory, even in a child's simplest terminology, although Izuku seemed to have the concept down packed, Hisashi couldn't help but wonder if Izuku had inherited his father's quirk, or some type of crazy animation of his father and biological mother's, if quirk doomsday theory had any hold. So it was innocently that Hisashi had asked, "What's your quirk, little listener?" And Izuku's face crumbled. You guys left on a cliffhanger? I'm laughing as if I'm not also left on a cliffhanger. That fucking asshole! Why would you do this to me? Bye! Bye! Okay, it's fine, it's fine. I'll maybe get to read it tomorrow or the next day. You guys have to wait 3 days. Ha 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 ha. So far, this is a really, really cute chapter so far. I know Hisashi's not going to be quirkist, so I'm not worried about that. I also stopped caring so much about my list towards the end of the episode, so if you hear misspoken words, no, you didn't. Just understand, I have a lisp. It's a... English isn't my first language, okay? I can't keep saying that. That's not... I'm fully fluent in English. That's not... I barely even have a freaking... I have a lisp, okay? I have a fucking lisp. It's really bad. It gets really bad after a while. And I have moments where, like, days where it's, like, really, really fucking bad. And, right now, that's what it is. And because I'm so concentrated in, fucking Christ. Because I'm so concentrated in, reading what I'm, like, saying what I'm trying to read. It's, like, it gets worse and worse. You know, you get what I mean? I'm just looking at the Minecraft gameplay, and I realized that this is the point where I lost the zombie. I was like, what the fuck happened? I'm like, holy shit, okay, time to, I guess, I lost the zombie, and I'm like, holy shit, wait, no. Now I lost the ghost. Not the ghost. Whatever. Point taken is, this is a really cute fan fiction so far. I didn't think I was gonna love it. Well, I mean, no, I knew I was gonna love it, but I didn't think I was gonna love it this much. It's literally making me want to record the next episode right fucking now. That's the type of thing I mean. And like very, very little like times I do that. I normally have very good self-control, and I'm fighting myself right now. This happens a lot, actually. Or not a lot, but it happens whenever I get left on a cliffhanger and I haven't read the fic before. You get what I mean? It makes you want to read more. And so the reason why I have more self-control is because I'm not left on a literal cliff. Here I am. Anyways, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.